There was a time when I believed that everything in life could be fixed if I just tried harder. You know the feeling when life is slipping out of your hands and all you can think of is pushing through. That was me. I was the guy who hustled every day, convinced that with enough effort, success would bend to my will. Every morning I woke up with a to-do list longer than the hours I had. I'd dive into work emails before my eyes even adjusted to the light. I was grinding, always grinding, whether it was for the next promotion, the next breakthrough, or just to prove to myself that I was enough. But no matter how much I pushed, nothing seemed to stick. Opportunities slipped away like sand through my fingers. Relationships fell apart despite my desperate attempts to hold them together. Every night I found myself lying awake wondering why life felt like a relentless battle. One evening, after another long day of chasing progress that never seemed to come, I wandered into the city park. I just needed to breathe just one moment without the weight of expectation. The park was quiet, mostly deserted with just a few joggers passing by and the rustle of leaves dancing with the breeze. I found a bench near the pond and sank into it exhausted, not just physically but emotionally too. I pulled out my phone to check emails out of habit, but then I stopped. I was so tired of the noise, the endless stream of tasks and the constant feeling that I was falling behind. I put the phone down, staring blankly at the water, my thoughts swirling. Then I heard a voice, soft but firm. "You're fighting a losing battle, aren't you?" Startled, I looked to my right and saw an old man sitting on the adjacent bench. He looked serene and almost like he belonged to the calmness of the evening itself. I didn't know him, but something about his presence felt oddly familiar, like a reminder of something I'd forgotten long ago. I forced a half smile. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, not really in the mood for small talk. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know, the more you resist, the more it persists. It's not the effort, that's the problem. It's the way you're clinging to it." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't exactly what I expected to hear. "What do you mean?" He shifted slightly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Have you ever tried to hold water in your hands? The tighter you grip, the faster it slips through. Life's like that. Sometimes the harder you try to control it, the more it escapes you." His words struck a chord. I'd spent years trying to mold my life into what I thought it should be, fighting to make things work to keep everything intact. But instead of gaining control, I was losing it. One failed relationship, one missed opportunity at a time. He continued, "Carl Jung once said, 'What you resist not only persists but grows in size.' You think you're solving the problem by pushing harder, but all you're doing is amplifying your own fear of failure." It wasn't the first time I'd heard a quote from Jung, but it was the first time it hit me like this. I realized that I had been living with clenched fists, trying to force life to align with my expectations. Maybe that was the problem. I looked down at my hands, flexing them open and closed, trying to process what he had just said. "So what are you saying? Just give up?" A slight smile broke across his face, gentle but firm. "Not give up. Let go. There's a difference. You're not abandoning your goals. You're releasing the need to control how they happen. Sometimes when you stop fighting, that's when things fall into place." I didn't want to believe it. Letting go felt like admitting defeat, but deep down I knew that holding on so tightly wasn't working either. I didn't want to be that guy anymore. The one who was always chasing, always striving, never at peace. The old man stood up slowly, stretching his back before looking at me one last time. "It's not about doing nothing. It's about being willing to do nothing when nothing more can be done. Trust that sometimes stillness is the answer." He walked away, blending into the shadows as the streetlights flickered on. I stayed on that bench for a long time, replaying his words in my mind. Was it really possible that my problem wasn't a lack of effort, but too much of it? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I'd been trying to force life into a shape that suited my fears, not my truth. I'd been so obsessed with controlling every outcome that I'd forgotten how to just be. That night I went home, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't write a to-do list. I didn't plan out my next move or try to predict the outcome of tomorrow's meeting. I just sat on the edge of my bed, breathing. letting the quiet settle in, and for the first time, I felt a hint of peace. Not because I'd solved my problems, but because I finally stopped trying to wrestle them into submission. I remembered what the old man had said about stillness being the answer when nothing else worked. Maybe, just maybe, letting go wasn't the same as giving up. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, a way of living that didn't involve constant resistance. As I lay down that night, I didn't feel defeated. I felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted just by acknowledging that I didn't have to fight so hard. The world wouldn't fall apart if I took a breath. Maybe by doing nothing for a change, I could finally find the space to become something more, something whole. I woke up the next morning with an unusual sense of calm. It wasn't that everything had changed overnight or that my problems had vanished. No, they were still there. Work, deadlines, strained relationships, and that nagging feeling that I was behind in life. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to rush into fixing everything. The old man's words still echoed in my mind. Sometimes when you stop fighting, that's when things fall into place. I couldn't fully embrace the idea yet, but it had sparked something, a crack in the wall I had built around my need for control. As I moved through my morning routine, I noticed how deeply ingrained my habits were. Constantly checking my phone for emails, mentally mapping out the day, calculating how to squeeze productivity into every minute. It felt exhausting just thinking about it. I stopped mid-brush toothpaste foaming in my mouth and looked at myself in the mirror. Who was I becoming? The reflection stared back, tired eyes, tense jaw, shoulders. Perpetually hunched as if bracing for another battle, I took a deep breath, trying to release the tension, and whispered to myself, let it go. Just for today. It sounded ridiculous, like some empty self-help mantra. But as I repeated it, something inside softened. Maybe I didn't have to tackle every problem at once. Maybe I could just take it moment by moment. That day at work, I decided to run a small experiment. Instead of over-preparing for a routine presentation, I decided to trust my instincts and my experience. Usually I'd spend hours perfecting slides and rehearsing every word. This time I reviewed the key points once and left it at that. Walking into the conference room, my stomach twisted with doubt. Was I being lazy? Unprepared? Would they see right through me? I couldn't shake the anxiety completely, but I reminded myself of the old man's advice. Sometimes doing less isn't failure, it's allowing space for things to flow. Surprisingly, the presentation went smoothly. I spoke naturally without the usual robotic precision. I trained myself to have. Colleagues nodded along, asked questions, and seemed genuinely engaged. When it was over, my boss gave me a brief nod of approval, and just like that, the meeting ended without the chaos I had anticipated. I left the room feeling both relieved and puzzled. I hadn't tried so hard this time. I hadn't overanalyzed or obsessed. I'd simply shown up as myself, and it worked. The rest of the day seemed lighter. Tasks that usually felt burdensome somehow unfolded without resistance. That evening, I went for a walk to clear my head. I found myself back at the park, drawn to the same bench where I'd met the old man. But this time he wasn't there. I sat down anyway, staring at the pond as the sun dipped below the horizon. A thought hit me. I had spent years trying to force everything to go my way, believing that if I just pushed hard enough, life would bend to my will. But the truth was, life didn't work like that. The more I fought, the more it fought back. I wasn't just fighting circumstances, I was fighting myself. Memories of past struggles surfaced, times when I had tried too hard to keep a relationship from falling apart, or pushed myself to exhaustion just to meet someone else's expectations. I remembered a friend once telling me, "You're always so tense, like you're afraid something will collapse if you let go." I had laughed it off back then, but now it made sense. I wasn't just afraid of failure, I was terrified of surrender. A jogger passed by, breaking my train of thought. I watched as he moved effortlessly, his pace steady and unhurried. It struck me how different it was from how I moved through life, always pushing, always striving. I whispered to myself again, let it go. It felt like I was speaking to more than just the stress of the day. I was speaking to the part of me that had been clutching so tightly to everything. Success, validation, control. Maybe the old man was right. Maybe it wasn't about giving up, but giving in, trusting that I didn't have to fight every battle to find peace. The next morning, I woke up feeling a bit more at ease. I didn't rush to check emails or fill every minute with tasks. Instead, I made coffee, sat by the window, and just watched the world outside come to life. A subtle warmth filled my chest, like a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to live my life in a constant state of tension. At work, I noticed a subtle shift. Instead of micromanaging every detail of a project, I delegated tasks to my team and let them take ownership. Normally, I would have hovered, double-checking every step. This time, I just let them handle it. To my surprise, the project moved smoothly. My colleagues seemed more confident when I trusted them to figure things out. I realized that my need to control wasn't just wearing me down, it was suffocating others too. That evening, I pulled out a notebook and jotted down a few thoughts. What if letting go doesn't mean losing? What if surrender is the only way to break free from the cycle of stress? What am I really afraid of losing by loosening my grip? My phone buzzed with a text from a friend I hadn't seen in months. Normally, I would have ignored it, claiming to be too busy, but this time I replied, "We made plans to meet up that weekend." It felt good, like I was slowly reconnecting with the part of me that didn't need to have it all figured out. As I lay down that night, I couldn't help but feel a little lighter. The old man's words were becoming more than just advice. They were becoming a way of life. I wasn't there yet, not fully, but for the first time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. The next day, I went back to the park, half hoping to see the old man again. I wanted to thank him, to tell him that his words had made a difference, but the bench was empty. I sat down anyway, letting the stillness settle around me. And in that quiet moment, I understood something. Letting go didn't mean I was losing control. It meant I was choosing to live differently without the burden of forcing every outcome. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let the silence wash over me. I wasn't just doing nothing. I was making space for life to unfold on its own terms. A few weeks passed since that evening in the park. I wouldn't say I was a completely different person, far from it. But something had shifted. It was subtle, like the way your body slowly adjusts to a new routine without even realizing it. I still caught myself falling into old habits, overthinking, controlling, planning, every detail, but now there was a small voice that whispered, "You don't have to." And sometimes I listened. One evening after work, I found myself sitting at home, phone in hand, scrolling through emails that didn't need my attention. I stopped, put the phone face down, and just stared at the ceiling. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, not to fill every moment with tasks I'd spent so much of my life trying to fill every gap, as if stillness itself was a problem to solve. I started experimenting with this new approach. At first, it was small things like not over-preparing for meetings or letting conversations flow without planning what I'd say next. Then I tried it with bigger things like letting a minor conflict at work resolve itself without stepping in to fix it. And to my surprise, it worked. People didn't fall apart just because I wasn't managing every detail. The world didn't crumble when I stopped trying to hold it together. One evening, I went back to the park. I guess I was hoping to see the old man again. Maybe I just needed a sign that I wasn't going crazy, because letting go still felt unnatural. But the bench was empty, just like the last time I sat there trying to make peace with the silence. A woman was practicing Tai Chi nearby, slow, fluid movements that seemed almost hypnotic. I couldn't help but watch. There was something graceful in the way she moved, calm, deliberate, at ease with the pace of her own body. I wondered how long it had taken her to move like that without rushing or forcing. It made me think about my own life, how I'd always been in a hurry to arrive somewhere, to achieve something, to fix whatever was broken. But what if I was never supposed to arrive? What if life wasn't about getting somewhere, but about being right here in this moment with all its imperfections? A soft breeze stirred the leaves, and I closed my eyes, letting the air wash over me. For once, I didn't feel guilty about just being. I didn't feel like I needed to do anything or prove anything. I just existed, and it was enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. Thoughts of work and unfinished tasks buzzed in my head like gnats. I tried to calm myself by remembering the old man's words. Doing nothing isn't giving up. It's allowing space for something else to emerge. But my mind kept pulling me back to worry. What if I was just being lazy? What if this new approach was just a way to avoid responsibility? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fooling myself. Eventually, I got up and made myself some tea, sitting by the window, as the city lights flickered in the distance. My thoughts wandered back to the woman in the park, moving slowly with purpose. Was that what stillness looked like, being in motion without forcing the outcome? The next morning at work, I faced a challenge I couldn't ignore. A major project deadline had moved up and the team was scrambling to meet it. My first instinct was to take control, organize every detail, oversee every task, make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. But I stopped myself. Instead, I gathered the team and said, "We're all in this together. Let's take it one step at a time. Trust your instincts and we'll figure it out as we go." It was terrifying, honestly. I could feel the old urge rising to micromanage, to make sure everything was perfect. But I forced myself to step back, to give space for others to take the lead. And you know what? The team thrived, ideas flowed more freely, people collaborated without feeling pressured, and tasks got done without my constant oversight. I could see it in their faces, the relief of not being controlled. Afterwards, a colleague pulled me aside and said, "You seem different lately, in a good way. It's like you're not so wound up." I didn't know how to respond. Was that really how I'd been wound up, tense, afraid to let things unfold naturally? It hurt to realize that my own rigidity had affected others too. That evening, as I walked back through the park, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and sadness. Pride that I was learning to let go, but sadness at how long it had taken me to see how tightly I'd been holding on. I sat down on the same bench, and as the sky darkened, I thought about the paradox of stillness. It wasn't about being passive or giving up. It was about making space, trusting that life didn't need my constant interference to move forward. In that quiet moment, I realized something important. I wasn't just learning to let go of control. I was learning to let go of the fear behind it, the fear that if I didn't manage every detail, my life would fall apart. Maybe I wasn't supposed to have everything figured out. Maybe the point was to allow the unexpected, to let life surprise me instead of planning every move. The air grew colder and I pulled my jacket tighter. I knew this journey wasn't over. There would still be days when I fell back into old habits, when I would fight the urge to control and struggle to trust the process. But for now, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just learning to let go. I was learning to be at peace with the unknown, to find calm in the spaces where I used to feel anxious. As I walked home, I felt lighter. Not because life was suddenly perfect, but because I was finally allowing myself to be imperfect, to move through life without the burden of trying to master every moment. Maybe stillness wasn't just a practice. Maybe it was a way of being the way to live with the flow of life instead of pushing against it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the secret to finding peace in the chaos. It's strange how change creeps in when you least expect it. One moment you're tangled in habits and routines, and the next you realize you've been living differently without even noticing. That's how it felt for me. For weeks, I had been trying to practice letting go, allowing life to happen without my constant interference. It wasn't perfect. There were days when I caught myself slipping back into old patterns. But the difference now was that I noticed I could see the tension before it took over, and sometimes I could breathe through it instead of being consumed by it. But one evening, as I was winding down, a wave of doubt hit me harder than before. I was sitting on my couch, just staring at the muted TV screen, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. I couldn't figure out where it came from. It was like this void had opened up, reminding me that I had let go of my old ways, but hadn't yet found something new to hold on to. I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing, learning to trust the process, allowing stillness, finding balance. But deep down, I felt lost. I missed the certainty that came with controlling every little detail. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the choices I'd made recently, stepping back at work, giving people more space, not pushing so hard for perfection. A voice in my head whispered, "You're just being lazy. You're giving up." The thought kept gnawing at me. Was I just fooling myself into thinking I was growing, when really I was just avoiding responsibility? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stuck in a limbo, neither my old self nor fully transformed. I got up and left my apartment needing fresh air. The city was quieter than usual, just the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark from a restless dog. I found myself heading back to the park almost instinctively. When I reached the familiar bench, I hesitated. I half expected to see the old man there, but the spot was empty. I sat down, pulling my jacket tighter against the cool night breeze. I looked up at the sky, trying to find some kind of answer among the stars. I could feel the doubt tightening around me, suffocating my resolve. And that's when it hit me. This was the void the old man had mentioned. The uncomfortable gap between letting go of control and finding peace. I'd thought surrendering would feel liberating, but now it just felt empty, like I was floating with no sense of direction. In the quiet, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. It was my dad. I was a kid, maybe 7 or 8, trying to build a model airplane from one of those kits. The pieces wouldn't fit right, and I was getting more and more frustrated, forcing the parts together until I broke one of the wings. I remember throwing the whole thing across the room, tears of anger and defeat welling up. My dad came in, picked up the broken model, and sat down next to me. He didn't scold me. He just said, sometimes when you push too hard, you break the very thing you're trying to build. I remember wiping my eyes, still angry. But if I don't push, it won't work. He smiled, that calm, knowing smile he always had. Sometimes you have to let things settle, stop forcing it, let it come together on its own. At the time, I didn't understand, but now sitting on that bench, I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were right next to me. It wasn't just about building models. It was about life I'd been pushing so hard to change, to become this new calm version of myself that I hadn't allowed myself the space to actually grow into it. It dawned on me that I was still chasing something, still trying to achieve a sense of peace rather than allowing it to take root naturally. I was treating stillness like a project to complete rather than a state to embrace. The realization was humbling. I couldn't force myself to transform any more than I could force that broken model plane to fly. I had to let it happen slowly, imperfectly, and without a set deadline. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, letting the old guilt and new confusion wash over me. Maybe the void wasn't a sign of failure. Maybe it was just the space where change happens, uncomfortable, uncertain, but necessary. When I finally got up to leave, I noticed something stuck to the back of the bench. A small piece of paper, weathered and faded. I peeled it off and unfolded it. In shaky handwriting, it read, "You're not manifesting. You're remembering." I couldn't help but smile. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was left by someone else looking for answers, but it didn't matter. It felt like a message meant for me. I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was rediscovering the person I was always meant to be. The walk home felt lighter. The void didn't seem as terrifying anymore. It was just part of the process, part of shedding the old way of being and giving space for something new to grow. When I got back to my apartment, I made myself some tea and sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I didn't feel the need to analyze it or make a plan. I just sat there, allowing myself to exist without judgment. It wasn't perfect. The doubt still lingered and the urge to control hadn't completely vanished. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting the feeling. I was letting it be and accepting that change doesn't come with a roadmap or a clear destination. As I sipped my tea, I thought about my dad again. How he always seemed to know when to push and when to just let things fall into place. Maybe I was starting to understand. Maybe instead of fighting to fill the void, I just needed to sit with it. It wasn't about achieving calm or mastering stillness. It was about letting go of the belief that I had to fix everything all the time. That night, sleep came easier. The void wasn't gone, but it didn't feel as suffocating. I wasn't running from it anymore. I was learning to sit with it, to make peace with the discomfort of change. And maybe that's the secret, not filling every gap with noise or movement, but allowing the quiet to teach you something about yourself. As I drifted off, I could almost hear my dad's voice again whispering, "Sometimes you just have to let it come together on its own." It's funny how the world doesn't change when you do. I woke up the next morning and everything looked the same. The city outside my window, the worn coffee cup on my counter, the endless list of tasks waiting for me at work. But I knew something inside me had shifted. I wasn't resisting as much. I wasn't trying to force every outcome. For once, I let the morning unfold without rushing to control it. I made my coffee, sat down, and just let the day come to me. As I walked into the office, I couldn't help but notice how differently I felt. The usual tension wasn't there, the kind that usually built up before I even opened my inbox. I let myself breathe before diving into emails, not trying to conquer my workload, but just moving through it one step at a time. Midway through the morning, my boss approached me with a new project, a big one, the kind that usually sent me into planning overdrive. I took a breath, reminding myself that I didn't have to control every detail from the start. "Can you take this on?" she asked. I nodded, resisting the urge to immediately start mapping out a strategy. "Yeah, I'll look into it," I replied, keeping my tone steady. She raised an eyebrow, probably expecting my usual rapid-fire list of ideas. Instead, I just smiled, feeling more grounded than I had in a while. "All right," she said, a bit surprised. "Let me know what you come up with." I watched her walk away, feeling a small wave of pride wash over me. It wasn't that I didn't care about the project, I just wasn't going to let it consume me. I could handle it without letting it take over my peace. Later that day, I decided to check in with a colleague, Sarah, who'd been struggling with her own workload. Usually, I just give her advice on how to be more efficient, but this time I just listened. As she vented about deadlines and stress, I didn't rush to fix it, I just let her talk. When she finally paused, she looked at me with a hint of surprise. "Thanks," she said. "I didn't really need a solution, just someone to listen." I smiled, realizing how often I tried to fix everyone else's problems, just like I tried to fix my own. Maybe part of letting go wasn't just about my own life. It was also about giving others the space to figure things out for themselves. As the week went on, I found myself navigating situations differently. Instead of reacting to every inconvenience or setback, I allowed them to unfold without immediately jumping to correct them. A late delivery, a last-minute change in plans, a misunderstanding with a client. I dealt with each one without that familiar surge of anxiety. It wasn't that I'd become indifferent. I still cared, I just didn't let the need for control dictate my actions. It was as if I discovered a new rhythm, one that didn't force solutions, but allowed space for them to emerge naturally. One evening, I met up with my old friend Mike for a drink. We hadn't caught up in months, mostly because I'd always been too busy. As we sat down, he looked at me with a curious smile. "Man, you seem different," he said. "Like less tense. What's going on?" I thought about it for a moment, swirling the ice in my glass. Honestly, I'm just trying to stop fighting everything, to let things be instead of always trying to control them. He raised his eyebrows. "Since when did you get all zen?" I laughed. "It's not zen. I don't know, it's just not exhausting myself over things. I can't change." Mike took a sip of his drink. "That sounds healthier." "I always wondered how you kept going the way you did. You used to be like a machine." Hearing that word made me pause. I had been like a machine programmed to keep moving, to keep fixing, to keep pushing. No wonder I'd burned out. We spent the evening just talking. No pressure, no agenda. For once, I wasn't trying to impress or prove anything. I just enjoyed being there, listening, sharing stories without overthinking. When I got home that night, I felt a strange sense of fullness, not because everything in my life was perfect, but because I wasn't striving to make it that way. It was the first time I truly felt that letting go didn't mean giving up. It meant making space for things to unfold without my constant interference. A few days later, I found myself back at the park. I hadn't planned to go. I just ended up there after a long walk. The bench was empty again, but that was okay. I didn't need the old man to validate my progress. I sat down and watched as a group of kids played soccer on the grass. One of them tripped and fell, bursting into tears. A moment later, his friend helped him up, and soon they were both laughing again, kicking the ball like nothing had happened. I couldn't help but smile. Kids had a way of moving on without overthinking. They didn't analyze why they fell or beat themselves up for it. They just kept playing. I leaned back, closing my eyes, feeling the sun on my face. Maybe I'd spent too many years trying to solve life like it was a problem to fix rather than a series of moments to experience. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to have it all figured out. I could just be here right now, without worrying about what came next. As I left the park, I felt a sense of peace, not because my problems were solved, but because I didn't feel the need to solve them all at once. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. Not success, not approval, not even peace itself. I was just learning to live with the uncertainty, and that was enough. The next day at work, the project deadline loomed closer, but I didn't panic. I trusted that my team and I would handle it together instead of stressing. I spent the day collaborating, actually listening to ideas without feeling like I had to control every detail. When the deadline came, the project wasn't flawless, but it was good. We'd done our best, and that was enough. My boss seemed pleased, but more importantly, I felt proud not just of the work, but of myself. For the first time, I wasn't trying to force a result. I was just allowing the process to happen. I knew I still had a long way to go, that old habits wouldn't disappear overnight. But for now, I was okay with that. It wasn't about never feeling anxious or never wanting control. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful move is to step back, to let go of the need to force life into a shape of my choosing. As I walked home that evening, I realized that I wasn't just practicing letting go. I was becoming someone who didn't need to grasp so tightly in the first place. And that quiet strength, that ability to surrender without giving up, felt more powerful than anything I'd chased before. It's a strange feeling when you finally realize that you don't have to chase life. For so long, I had been convinced that I needed to keep moving, pushing, striving, just to feel worthy. But as the weeks passed, I began to see things differently. One morning as I walked to work, I found myself actually noticing the world around me. The sky wasn't just a backdrop to my commute. It was painted with shades of blue and streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. People were out jogging, sipping coffee at corner cafes, just existing. For the first time, I wasn't rushing past them. I wasn't lost in my head, planning the next task. I just walked one step at a time without forcing my mind to be anywhere but here. It wasn't a grand epiphany, more like a quiet, steady realization. I had spent so many years chasing the idea of success, of being someone who had it all together. But in trying to become that version of myself, I had missed out on the simple, unplanned moments that made life feel real. When I got to the office, my boss called me in for a quick chat. My first thought was the usual spike of anxiety. Had I messed something up? Was I about to be reprimanded? But as I sat down, she smiled. "I've noticed a change in you lately," she said. "You seem calmer, more focused. Whatever you're doing, it's working." I didn't know how to respond at first. I hadn't been doing more. In fact, I'd been doing less stressing, less overthinking, less forcing. "Thanks," I replied. "I guess I just stopped trying so hard to make everything perfect." She nodded. "Sometimes that's exactly what we need. Keep it up." As I left her office, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and relief. I wasn't sure where this new version of me was heading, but it felt like I was finally moving in the right direction. Later that afternoon, I caught up with Sarah in the break room. She was juggling a stack of files, clearly overwhelmed. Usually I jump in with solutions, ways to manage time, streamline tasks, whatever I thought might help. But this time I just asked, "You doing okay?" She looked up, surprised. "Honestly, not really. I keep trying to stay on top of everything, but it's like I'm constantly falling behind." I leaned against the counter. I know the feeling. Sometimes it helps to just pause, take a breath, stop trying to hold it all together for a minute. She gave a weak smile. "I guess I'm not used to doing that. Feels like giving up." "I get it," I said. "But sometimes giving yourself a break isn't giving up. It's just making room for things to settle." She nodded, looking thoughtful. "Maybe I'll try that." Walking back to my desk, I realized that just a few months ago, I wouldn't have been able to give that advice because I didn't believe it myself. Letting go had always seemed like defeat, not strength. But now I was starting to understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let life happen without trying to wrestle it into submission. That evening, I found myself wandering back to the park, almost on instinct. I didn't expect to see the old man, but part of me hoped he'd be there just to see how far I'd come. The bench was empty, but that was okay. I sat down, breathing in the cool evening air. The memory of our conversation felt clearer now, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. As I watched the leaves rustle in the wind, I thought about how life kept moving, whether I tried to control it or not. The world didn't stop just because I paused to breathe. And in that simple truth, I found comfort. I'd been trying to become someone new for so long, someone stronger, more successful, more put together, but maybe I didn't need to become anything. Maybe I just needed to remember who I was without all the expectations weighing me down. For so long, I'd been focused on proving myself at work and relationships, even to myself. I'd convinced myself that chasing success was the only way to feel fulfilled, but I was realizing that fulfillment wasn't about achievement. It was about being present enough to notice the good that was already there. The next day, I woke up feeling different, not transformed, but lighter. I still had responsibilities, challenges, and doubts, but they didn't feel like weights anymore. They were just part of the day, not something I had to fix or control. I moved through my morning routine without rushing, appreciating the small moments, the smell of fresh coffee, the warmth of sunlight through my window, the quiet before the city woke up. At work, I tackled my tasks without the usual urgency. I trusted that I knew what I was doing, that I didn't have to micromanage every step. And when challenges came up, I didn't panic. I faced them, dealt with them, and let them go. That evening, I got a text from Mike. "You free this weekend? Let's catch up." I smiled. I didn't think about my schedule or whether I should prioritize work. I just replied, "Yeah, sounds good." As I sat down to unwind, I realized that I had finally stopped chasing. I wasn't running after the next accomplishment or the next big change. I was just here, and that was enough. Maybe the old man was right all along. Maybe the secret wasn't in doing more or being more. Maybe it was in letting go of the need to prove something, in just being present enough to notice life happening around me. As the night settled in, I looked out at the city lights and took a deep breath. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't have every answer, and I didn't need to. For the first time, I was okay with that. I wasn't fighting to control my life anymore. I was just living it, and somehow that made all the difference. Maybe that's what it really means to do nothing, not to be passive, but to be open, to let go of the constant striving and trust that life has its own rhythm. And as I closed my eyes, ready for sleep, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't chasing anymore. I was just becoming quietly, steadily, one day at a time.